Okay, so I just wanted to talk about Genesis 1:1 because I think as the outset of the Bible, it provides us with a profound clue as to how we should interpret the rest of the Bible. It provides us with some really important indications, and so we need to ask three questions in order to proceed with that. One is, why is it stated the way that it is? Two is, what do we know about that? And then three is, where do we go with that information? So just to clarify, Genesis 1:1 basically says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and that's essentially that's the most basic standard form of it. It might vary a bit from one Bible translation to another, and others have commented on that wording and how maybe you could make it more accurate depending on how you want to translate it. But I'm really more interested in what the context, the cultural context is for this verse. So the first question then is, why does it say in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth? Well, in the West, in our modern Western culture, we kind of just take this for granted. We skim right over this and we move right along. But the problem is we miss the clues because we don't understand the cultural context of what's going on here. So you have to imagine, okay, if you ask the question, why does it say God created the heavens and the earth specifically, it doesn't seem like a totality of what we would know about the universe. And certainly if you're somebody who's living a few millennia ago, you don't have a picture of what the cosmos really looks like. So the best thing that you would know is, well, you walk out of your tent, you look up and you see the big blue sky, and you look down and you see that ground, and far off in the distance they connect to each other, right? So that's essentially everything that you know, everything that's in the sky, everything that's on the ground. And just as a quick note, heavens, Hashemayim, really is just the same word for sky, so it's translated as either sky or heavens. Basically just means the sky. Haaretz, of course, is just the earth. So you've got these two basic aspects of creation. So the second question is, well, then what exactly does that tell us? What's this indication that we're talking about here? Well, in the 19th century, there were great strides that were made in biblical studies and archaeology. And there was a document, well, I don't know if you would call it a document, but basically it was a story. Enuma Elish was discovered, and in the mid-19th century it was announced what it was. And basically what we know about this story, Enuma Elish, is that it's a Babylonian creation myth. And biblical scholars realized not only is this older than the biblical text that we have, but we can tell how the biblical text is in conversation with this. So this is a contemporaneous creation story. And again, remember how important the Babylonians are in relation to the Israelites. But this is a contemporary creation story, and what we can see is, for a variety of reasons, the language throughout the biblical text shows us that really largely Genesis, is in conversation, in dialogue with this other story, Enuma Elish. And not just Enuma Elish, but others. But this is one really important and helpful story that gives us some clues. So one example is this very verse, Genesis 1:1. So just some background on Enuma Elish and what's going on in that creation myth is, long and short of it, you've got these two gods who are warring against each other, and the one god, Marduk, destroys the other goddess, Tiamat, and basically cuts her body in half and uses the top half of her body to create the heavens and the bottom half to create the earth. And so what comes about is the creation of the world. And so the way that that happened then is through this warring battle conflict. So then you've got the biblical author who comes along and says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So it didn't come about from a war. It didn't come about because of conflict. It came about because God chose to do this. There was one mighty, almighty God who decided to create the world out of goodness and love and so forth. And so we get this difference in idea, not just from this first verse, but from other clues throughout Genesis and elsewhere. And so what we're actually seeing here is really more of a theological difference. It's a theological statement that's being made by the biblical authors. It's saying that no, your view of God and how the world came to be, that's not how it happened. We know that God is like this, and this is how God created the world, etc. So the essential point here is not to establish some sort of scientific basis for specifically how the world was created. The point of the biblical author in Genesis 1:1 and throughout Genesis is to demonstrate their view of what God is like, why humans are here, why life is like it is, and how it got that way. So for anybody that's thinking this might be a stretch, this is just one example. It's just the first example that we see when we start reading the Bible. There are many other examples as well. And so it's not just a random hypothesis. We can see precisely how it is that the Bible is responding to these other contemporary creation myths and other tales from that time. Okay, so then what do we do with that? Well, I think this is really important for us to understand because, in my view, we can't really fully understand the Bible without understanding the cultural context. We can't understand it without knowing why the authors wrote what they wrote and how that interacts with their contemporary culture. You have to think about it this way. This dialogue was sort of lost to history for quite a while. We only discovered, at least in our Western world, we only discovered this Babylonian creation myth a century and a half or so ago, and it's really essential to simply the process of how we interpret the Bible overall. Now, I think a lot of people might want to say, well, you don't need to know those things. It's not essential to understanding the message of the Bible. And that may or may not be true, but I do think that it does hinder our understanding, our sufficient understanding of the Bible, because without it, we're reading in our own cultural context with our own perspectives, and we have our own framework for understanding it, and we impose our ideas onto the text without that. And for us, those who read the Bible regularly in our modern day, there is a grand history of how the Bible has been interpreted, and so we're bringing along all of those things with us, which can be helpful, but if we've lost the original context of it, we're losing an essential piece to how we have to interpret it. So this is big. I think this is profound. I think this is extremely helpful to know this. I think this is information that it's great that we have it now, and we can move forward with a better understanding of the Bible and how to interpret it. So to summarize, as we continue beyond Genesis 1:1, reading the rest of the Bible, we need to apply this concept. There are a variety of cultural concept aspects that maybe we don't have access to right now. Maybe we don't have access to, at least in our modern mind. And so that's why archaeology, biblical studies, even some theology like philosophy, these things are really helpful to us. They help us to better approach the texts genuinely. So moving forward, let's just make sure that we're aware of this kind of thing.